Hi, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I am delighted to meet you. I'm Jen, and I'm so happy you're here. I've experienced radical healing on a carnivore diet, and I'm here to help you do the same. I'd love for you to join me today as we chat with a very special guest. Our guest today is Natalie, and she is a ketogenic athlete that appears to have it all together. However, she has dealt with her fair share of mental health, body image, and disordered eating issues in her life. She gets pretty vulnerable in this interview and shares why this was all happening and how she overcame each obstacle. Be sure to stick around for the end when we dive deep into mindset and motivation. Trust me, it's good stuff. As I mentioned, I've got a guest today, Natalie. She is a certified health and life coach, personal trainer, and nutritional therapy practitioner specializing in low carb and ketogenic nutrition for body transformation with a focus on emotional eating and behavior change. She personally struggled with disordered eating as a teen and then adopted a low carb paleo lifestyle over 10 years ago. She became a WBFF Diva Bikini Pro at the age of 36, but soon after, she ended up in a year-long battle with depression and bulimia. Now at 40, she's healthy, happy, and thriving, and on a mission to help other women achieve freedom from food obsession while building their dream bodies. Today, we're going to dive into her highs and lows with regards to diet, fitness, mental health, and body image. Whew, that is a lot to say, girl. I am proud of all that you've achieved. And let's dive into the first question that I have. So you're a bikini pro. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, can you please explain that?
Sure thing. Yeah, sometimes I forget there's a whole world that doesn't know anything about this world. It is the world of competitive bodybuilding. There is a female division called bikini, and it is really the entry point into bodybuilding for women. There are 4 different levels, essentially, of competitive bodybuilding for women. It starts with bikini, and then it goes up to wellness, figure, physique, and then ultimately that big bodybuilder on stage. I'm happy to say we're seeing less and less of the female bodybuilder that's just really large, having to use a lot of performance enhancing drugs and steroids to get to that level. And bikini is the largest category or division now in the sport. It's a much softer, more feminine kind of look. And particularly with the WBFF, which is the federation in which I compete. It stands for Beauty, Fashion, Fitness, World Beauty, Fashion, and Fitness. So it is kind of a combination of pageantry meets bodybuilding meets fashion runway. You kind of get a little bit of all of it. You get some runway walking, you get a gown round when you compete in the bikini and the wellness divisions. And then the fitness and figure divisions get to wear theme wear that is kind of reminiscent of the Victoria's Secret models with the wings and the feathers. So it's a lot of fun. It's a little different than your traditional bodybuilding federations that are just straight step on stage and pose and flex. And it brings a lot more of the personality to the stage. But in short, that's what a bikini pro is. You can compete as an amateur. And then the goal of essentially all amateur competitors is to get that pro card or pro status in the sport. So I am a professional bodybuilder.
That is really cool. And oh my gosh, I just learned so much about this world that I did not know existed. The angel wings and all that. That's super fun. Now let's backtrack a bit. I understand that you were a dancer growing up. So what was your relationship with your body and food like during that time?
That question took me back, girl. I haven't thought about that in a while, but I started dancing late for dancers. Essentially, you'll usually hear that dancers start at like 2-3 years old in like these little baby ballet classes, and that wasn't me. I didn't start until I was 12 years old in middle school, and so at first it was just this love of dance and diving in and starting, and then by the time I got to my senior year in high school, it became my passion, and I ended up going to college for it. The high school dance years are much more blurry in my mind. I had the eating disorder before I ever started dance, and it was more of a reflection of my family. We moved from the Northeast, the Boston area, to deep in the South in Georgia when I was 11 years old. And that was really where all of the disordered eating began. It was this taking me out of my safe place and putting me into, at a very tender age of first year in middle school and sixth grade, with all these new people, being the new kid, being weird and being different and talking different and being made fun of and trying to fit in. And then that's where really all the body image stuff started. It was this, I don't fit the ideal for this new culture that I'm in. I was more of a tomboy when we first moved to the South. I had like the Northeast kind of hard shell style, the baggy shorts and all of that. And then, you know, I was around all these Southern girls who were slim and they wore the little short shorts. And of course you start paying attention to the opposite sex. So it was like, you know, what do the boys like? And all of that getting in my head was really where it started. So all of kind of the behaviors that led to bulimia was that 11, 12-year-old. It wasn't until, and I guess I said 12 was when I started dancing, but that's not true. It was really probably more 13, 14 when I got in high school. And so dance at first was just fun and it was a love, and it wasn't really serious, like it wasn't competitive dance. And then it was college that your question kind of triggered some thoughts in my mind that I'd forgotten about. And it was in college when I remember walking into the ballet studio and looking for the skinny part of the mirror. I didn't want to see my body the way it actually looked. And so if you went too close to the seam in the mirror in the ballet studio, you kind of got this funhouse mirror slimming down effect. And I had to get in class early enough so that I could get that spot. One of those kind of banner moment memories that my brain erased. But as soon as I read your question, that was the first thing that came in my mind. Being in a class where now it's a little more serious than it was in high school, and leotards and tights, and there was a dress code, and you know, we all wore our tights a certain way. You wear them in college, we all wore them outside our leotards, so they would sit on the outside. And so if you had any excess body fat in your abdomen, it would show and it would protrude over the tights. And there was just all of this worry about the way I look and kind of nitpicking my body and body checking, looking at all of those things. And then I started the bulimic behaviors in middle school, and they were kind of off and on. Sometimes I would get them more under control. I never had to go to a facility for recovery. It never got that serious, but it would be this off and on thing. And it lasted up until my junior year of college. And it was really a really close friend of mine catching me in the act. And we sat down and we prayed together, and I've always had a deep faith. And it was this moment of somebody really loves you and cares about you and doesn't want to see you do this to yourself. That kind of was a snap out of it moment for me. And I made a commitment right then and there with her and God that that's it, no more. And then I stopped cold turkey with the behaviors, right? The behaviors are one thing, but the underlying causes of those behaviors were not dealt with, and they were masked. So for many years, I didn't participate in binging and purging. But it, as I know we'll get into, it reared its ugly head in later years.
Yes, we will definitely get into that. And I can't tell you how many times I had goosebumps just listening to you. The first thing was that the skinny part of the mirror. I mean, it reminds me so much of things that girls must be dealing with now, because I know I still deal with, where it's like you don't even want to see a photo of yourself if there's no filter available, you know, or like yes. I know what you mean with the mirrors too, finding the right mirror, the right angle when you're taking a photo or a video. And I'm guilty of that. And I'm almost 40 also. So I just feel so bad for these girls that are 15 and thinking that filtered stuff is real. I hope they're able to overcome that.
Thinking back, even with everything I've dealt with, I can't imagine having the social media that girls today have to compete with on a day-to-day basis, or feel that they have to compete with these ideals that are just on another level. I mean, when we were growing up, it was the skinny Kate Moss era. So we had supermodels, but they were so far removed from us, and it was this standard of beauty, unfortunately. But the level of in your face, seeing other people all the time who seem to have this perfect body or perfect face, and thinking we need to compete with that, the level of that today has unfortunately gotten to a much higher prevalence.
Yes, definitely. Well, unfortunately, we can't solve that in 2 minutes. So let's backtrack a bit more to go into some diet and exercise stuff. So I know that you struggled for a while on and off, but when did you start incorporating more of a low carb or keto or paleo, whatever you started with? When and why did you sort of go down that path?
Sure, yeah, and this was 100% my health. Between, like I said, I stopped the binging and purging around 19 years old, and then until it was my mid-20s when I was in, you get into your career, and I've always been an overachiever, and I would work all these excess hours. I was in this toxic relationship. I was living with my ex. I never got married, but we were living together for a couple of years. He was cheating on me chronically, and I kept finding out and was dealing with that turmoil. And it was also that initial like falling in love, and we're going out to eat all the time, and we're putting on weight together. And so I put on some weight. I wasn't dancing anymore. I wasn't active like I once was. And I was sitting at a desk for 10 hours a day. And I had a mortgage that I was paying by myself, and all of these stressors of life, where I had this chronically high stress. Of course, my mother was telling me all the time I needed to calm down, but what do you do at 25 years old? I can handle it. I'll sleep when I'm dead. So I wasn't taking care of myself. And it wasn't until I kicked him out, and I was going to church every Sunday and crying in the pew, and in a place where I was ready to heal. And so it started with this desire to heal my heart. And I started spending more time alone. Naturally, I didn't have him in the house anymore, but I had all these stressors of having to pay the mortgage by myself. And so I wasn't eating enough. I lost the first year by myself. I lost a lot of weight, and I was underweight. I was under 100 pounds. And I had all these chronic issues. So some of them stemmed from the bulimia that I never thought to connect those dots until I got really interested in health and nutrition and starting to learn some things. So I had chronic migraines. I had stomach ulcers and esophageal ulcers. I had GERD, so gastrointestinal reflux disease. I had a hiatal hernia. So it was a lot of GI issues that were causing the other issues. I was on all of these antidepressants, supposedly to help my GI symptoms, because there's a lot of medications out there that are actually antidepressants, but they're being used for other conditions. At the time, of course, I was not educated at all on any alternative medicine. So everything my doctor said went. Take this pill for the rest of your life. You don't have to change anything with your diet. With chronic heartburn, not telling me to change anything that I'm eating, that my food had nothing to do with it. And I just had to take this medication. So I was on birth control and about 5 other daily medications, some of which made me sick, so I didn't want to take them. For the migraines, for example, made me really nauseous. I was on all this stuff. I felt terrible. And pretty much my whole life, even before the bulimia started, I always had gut issues. And, back in the 80s and 90s, we knew nothing about gluten. We knew nothing about food sensitivities, and I grew up in an ethnic household. So it was like, you're being dramatic, get over it. It wasn't a thing to look into when you had stomach issues. And it happened with me after just about every big meal. Growing up in an Italian and Greek household, we had a lot of pasta. We had a lot of things that were not working with my digestion, and I would be just doubled over. So it wasn't until I started healing the inner that I started seeing myself as valuable just for who I am and not what I look like, not what, what I can do for others. And when I started seeing that, I started seeing my body as a vessel, and I started caring more about what I was putting into it. And so it started with as simple as like taking out the chips and the cookies and the more, obviously unhealthy things, and replacing them with crudité, with, instead of chips and dip after work while I'm making my dinner, it would be, veggies with Greek yogurt, so I started like slow and just moving in that direction. So I would say I went clean eating before I ever went paleo, or before I ever focused on the low carb. So it was a progression. And honestly, the biggest thing that really made the biggest difference was I gave up dairy for Lent the year after my breakup. And my skin cleared up, my mood improved, I lost some weight. It was never for those reasons. It was a religious purpose. And people started complimenting me and making comments. And I said, well, I just gave up dairy. What are you doing? I just gave up dairy. It was a Lenten thing, so I put it back in afterwards. And as many of us do on our journey, I think I'll be okay. I'll just put it back in, or maybe being a little out of touch with reality when we really like something and we want to have it. And so we kind of lie to ourselves about what it's doing to us. And then I noticed backtracking in my health. So I tried giving it up again. And this time I started reading labels. And that's really what brought me into what led me to paleo. Once I started reading labels, because I was just looking for the dairy, and I was like, I'm not going to eat it. This time I'm not going to eat anything that's made with dairy. And so that took all of the baked goods out, breads, everything's made with dairy when you start to read. But then I also started getting educated on what else is in food, or so-called food, really wasn't food. I was like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? So once I went out to Hibachi with some friends for a birthday, and I ordered just the steak and the chicken and the shrimp and the veggies. And somebody asked me, oh, are you paleo? And I was like, what's that? I'd never heard of it before. And they were like, oh yeah, you don't eat the rice, and you don't. And so I started looking into paleo, and I realized I was pretty close, except I ate a ton of hummus. And then I learned that legumes were quote unquote not paleo, right? Because labels and what we say things are mattered to me at the time. And I said, okay, well, let me try this paleo thing. So I read about what's paleo and what's not paleo. And I actually fully went into it, and continued to get benefits, where I think it was 2013. So this was 3 years in now. Well, 2 years in, because it started in 2011. 2013, at that point, I was off all of my medications. The only thing I was still taking was birth control. And I'd read a lot more about what birth control does in the female body. And then I decided that was going to be the last thing to go. And I came off of it, and I'll never forget, I was in the middle of doing my first Whole30 in October of 2013. And I remember when I first heard about what Whole30 was, and, oh, you don't even eat honey, you don't even eat sweet things. I was like, what? I could never do that. And then natural progression and just focusing on my health and how I felt, I thought, okay, I'm ready to try this. In the middle of my first Whole30, I was in New Orleans of all places, which is a very difficult place to be Whole30, because they do not modify their foods for you when you go to a restaurant. Nope, it comes with the sauce, and no, we're not taking that off. But I did the best I could. And I'll never forget, this is kind of a very personal story, but bleeding through my favorite white shorts. But I celebrated that moment, because never in my life did I not know my period was coming, because I had had excruciating cycles from the time I was 11 years old and got my period the first time. So this was like the Holy Grail. I thought coming off of birth control, I would be in for a world of hurt. And it was the best period I ever had. It came without warning. It was short-lived, and I couldn't believe how good I felt. So that was kind of like the pinnacle of this new lifestyle is really changing, has changed everything. I essentially healed everything just from changing my lifestyle.
That's so interesting how you just sort of stumbled into it. I mean, I think now people that come across keto, low carb, carnivore, those kinds of things, they see things on social media and stuff. But like you mentioned, we really didn't have all of that 10 plus years ago. I mean, we
Yeah.
were starting with Facebook and all that, but it wasn't like it is today, where there's just all of this information at your fingertips. So good for you for just sort of following how you felt and finding your way down this path.
100%, it was all about healing. And, I see so many people in this space, especially in the carnivore space, coming to it because of all the pain and the chronic issues, illnesses that they've been dealing with. There is no greater motivator than being in pain on a regular basis. I was ready to do anything. I was the first 3 months of going into paleo. It was so strict. I'll never forget going to a cafe with my girlfriends about 3 months in and deciding, okay, I'm going to indulge. And I ordered this coffee, chocolate, alcoholic drink. It like had everything in it. And I took a few sips and immediately it was like detox city. I was sweating. I was like, oh, my body wants to get this out. I had to excuse myself. I came back and I did not drink the rest of it and I just drank water. And it was so powerful to me that when I get all that crap out, my body immediately recognizes when it doesn't want this toxic substance in it, and it will tell me right away. So yeah, the body keeps the score, as they say.
Absolutely. So that makes sense why you've stuck with this kind of a diet for all of your adult life, basically. But what about the workout piece? When did you really start getting into the weightlifting?
Yeah, sure. And actually, that's where keto came in as well. It was, like I said, I had lost a lot of weight from the heartbreak and not eating enough, and definitely not eating enough protein. So when I first discovered paleo, that's when I started adding more eggs and more meats into my diet. And as I was healing my heart, I had found pole dance fitness. And not only had I gone back to the traditional dance studio, but I discovered this pole fitness and I started doing that and I fell in love with it. And it is an intense core and upper body workout. And as a very short dancer, I've always been really strong in my legs, but my upper body and my core were never that strong. I never had a six pack. I was never that fit. I was always a curvy ethnic girl. So getting into the pole studio, and I started loving it so much, I was doing it 5-6 days a week. I built this upper body, and with that first Whole30, I found I had my first six pack, but I was also still very small. So somebody planted the seed when I did one of our performances, because my studio would do pole performances. And somebody said, do you compete? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, in physique competition, bodybuilding. And I knew nothing about the world of bodybuilding back then, but it planted a seed and I started doing some research and I thought about it, but I kept it in the back of my mind. And then a couple years later, I'd been teaching pole at this point and I broke my thumb. And they essentially kicked me out. They were like, you're a liability, get out of the studio. And this was the first time I binged in, all these years since college. And now when I look back and I see it, it was this losing what I loved, losing the social aspect, being alone. And it was like all of these things that once again will come up later in the story. But when that happened, it freaked me out. I was like, oh, this is not good. I do not want to go down that road again. And so I'd put on a little bit of weight when I wasn't as active. And I remembered this, bodybuilding, let me look into that a little bit more. And I needed at that time, I really felt I needed a motivator, like a carrot to reach for. I've always been goal oriented. So that's when I decided I want to do my first bikini competition.
So you decided before you ever even started lifting weights? Wow.
Yeah. Now, I had been exposed to it. I have a really close friend, ex-boyfriend, who was a trainer. And so from time to time, he would train me, but it wasn't a consistent thing in my life. And I want to say it was around that same time, 2015 or so, that he started training me. And that's where it all started, when I decided I would really love to compete. So he started training me. I really didn't enjoy it very much back then. But then I also was really into my faith at the time, and I had gotten into directing retreats. And I directed this retreat, and this woman came on the retreat, and she was older than me. She might have been in her 40s, and she had these amazing muscular arms. And I just went up to her and I said, I love your arms. I want arms like yours. What do you do? And she told me she was a competitor, a master's competitor. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is a goal of mine. I've been wanting to do that. And so I connected with her and signed up with her gym, signed up with her as my personal trainer. And I did not compete that year. My novice brain was, oh, I thought I was going to get on stage in a few months. And I learned from the School of Hard Knocks, it doesn't work that way. When you have not been training and you haven't built up the foundation, you're not going to get on stage in 4 months. So I actually went through 4 different personal trainers that year at my gym, because she moved, and then I got put with someone else, and I got put with someone else. And eventually I ended up with this guy who I credit so much of my journey to. He was a corrective specialist when it comes to training. And he looked at my imbalances, and he took all the weights out of my hands, and he said, we've got to work on fixing these imbalances before we have you lifting. And I was, of course, very frustrated by that, because all I wanted to do was lift and put on muscle and get on stage. And he was the one that said, no, you're not getting on stage this year. Let's work on all of these things first. And I couldn't believe, ever since I was a dancer, I always had low back problems. And working with him through that time, I had no back pain. My core was stronger than ever, and I could actually lift weight without problems. So that was absolutely essential to the rest of my journey. And it made lifting more enjoyable. It sucks when everything hurts and you're not doing things right, and you don't realize you're not doing things right because you're embarrassed to ask for help, and you're just suffering through it on your own. And so one of the things I say, even with my ladies, because I do online coaching, I don't do in-person personal training, but I encourage my ladies to go and at least get, at the very least, a free assessment at your gym from a personal trainer. Have somebody look at the way that you are moving your body, because if you don't do that, you could be doing a lot more harm than good in the long run. So that was my entree into bodybuilding. And it wasn't until the following spring that I actually got on stage for the first time. And I was part way into my first prep with my first coach, who I told her I wanted to do it paleo, and I was eating like a ton of sweet potatoes, because the traditional bodybuilding prep is higher carb and lower fat, which I do not recommend for anyone, because our fat is really important for our hormonal balance and optimal health. And so I got into it, and I got really sick about 4 or 5 weeks in with her. She had me doing a ton of cardio and eating all these carbs and lowering my fat, and I felt terrible. And I went to Paleo FX that year in 2016, and I cornered Menno Henselmans, who's an incredible, he's a bodybuilder, he's a statistician, he puts out a lot of really great scientific-based information. And he spoke at Paleo FX that year about the metabolism. And I cornered him afterwards because I knew he was actually a WBFF pro, and I knew eventually I wanted to compete in the WBFF. And I told him what I was struggling with, and I asked him for advice, and he's the one that said, if you really want to do it with a paleo template and higher fat, I really think you should look into keto. And it just so happened I had a really good friend who was much more overweight than I was, but had followed my journey and decided to try keto, and she lost 80 pounds. So I called her on my way home from the conference. I said, I'm going keto, and I had her support. And then I started doing, all the research online, and I found this group called Keto Gains. And it's a massive group on Facebook, over 100,000 members, and everything they did at the time was free, and they just put out a bunch of free information. And they happened to come to my city. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and so I got to meet Luis Villaseñor, who's the founder, and sit down with him, and he answered all my questions. And so I have to say I was really lucky that I got introduced to keto that way, because the way that they do keto is a paleo template. It's a very real food, whole foods based ketogenic template. It's not based on dirty keto and keto treats and macros over everything. And their approach was not a very high low protein approach, because their approach was for body composition. So I learned how to do it right for body composition at that time. And so I used that template, and I coached myself through my first couple of preps using a ketogenic diet. It was amazing. I couldn't believe how good I felt. As you know, like you don't have the hunger and the cravings that you deal with on a keto diet. So I fell in love with keto. I had that keto high, I had the keto energy, and I was able to build the body that I loved, this body I never even imagined I could live in, using keto and weightlifting.
Wow, that's really incredible. And I'm so glad you found keto. That's so cool. You kind of stumbled into that too. But I imagine that during the prep, you still had to be fairly rigid with calories, at least for, getting that exact body for a bikini competition. So did that rigidity end up leading to any of those old binging thoughts or behaviors or anything like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. So, yeah, with a bodybuilding style cut, for a stage, you are decreasing calories as you go, and you have to get to levels of body fat that no human being should be walking around with. So it can be really healthy at the beginning of a prep. And that first prep I did was 16 weeks. So it was a 4-month prep. First couple of months can be really healthy. And then you get to this place where your calories start getting really low. And I'm a small person, I'm 5 feet tall. So my calories had to get lower than what you ever hear out there. Oh, nobody should ever go below 1200. Well, when you're a small human being, you're going to get lower than that. So I was subsisting on very little by the time it was stage time, let's say maybe those last 4 to 6 weeks. And certainly, and doing it without a coach, mind you. So you have a lot of, the thing with a bodybuilding prep is it tests everything you have within you, beyond the hunger and the diet and the training, the physical challenges, which there are a lot of. There's a million more mental challenges. It's about mental toughness. How far are you willing to push yourself? You have to push yourself beyond what any healthy human being would do. And then you start freaking out about being ready on time, especially for your first show. And I'll tell you, it kind of happens every time. Now that I have an incredible support system around me, with my life partner and also my coach, I have those voices of reason to talk me off the ledge. But it tends to happen toward the end of a prep, no matter what. Oh my God, I'm not going to be lean enough. I'm not going to get enough body fat off. And you want to do more extreme things that are really not healthy. So even in that, I think it was the very first prep, I did a PSMF. If you've heard of protein sparing modified fast, I had learned about that and I read about that. And I thought, oh, I'm going to need this to get to stage. And it's very, very low fat and carb. And you are literally just eating a lot of protein and almost no fuel, because you're trying to burn off all the body fat you possibly can. And something happens when you do that, and when you do it too much, like consecutive days in a row when you don't have a lot of body fat on your body already. You cannot digest. It's impacting your bowels. It's impacting your health. And I felt all of that. So all of these things, you're eating less, even though you may be eating, and I was eating all real food, whole food, very nutrient dense foods, you're just not eating a lot of it. So your body is not getting the nutrients that it needs for your brain and for your body. So now the mental health is being affected as well. So it was the first show. I got through the first show without any binging. And then after that first show, coming out of a bodybuilding show is the most vulnerable time in your life. You have never been so lean. You've never seen yourself looking so good, which, to be quite frank, now where I am in my journey, I can look back at past shows and say, I would never want to walk around looking the way I looked on stage. It doesn't look good to me anymore. Whereas back then it was, oh, the smaller the better. So you come out of that and you have this body dysmorphia going on. You're afraid to put on any body weight. Once the body fat starts coming back on, which it needs to do to get back to a healthy place, you start feeling overweight. It doesn't make any sense because you're still leaner than most of the population. So without support and a careful strategic plan, you can put on a lot of body fat very quickly, and end up, now 30 pounds in the other direction. And so I did have some binging after that first show, and luckily I was still so connected to my why at that time, which was still the health. That was the original plan, or why I wanted to do that. So I canceled my next show. I was going to do a show in 4 weeks after that. And I said, no, no. And it was going into the holidays, and it was about, I know what will happen if I keep restricting calories, right? And I want to be clear on that. I know we'll talk a little bit more about the restriction piece, but I'm truly of the mind that keto is not a restrictive diet. Carnivore is not a restrictive diet. And people hear that and they're blown away. They're like, you're eliminating whole food groups. And restriction is not giving your body what it needs to thrive and function and optimally, not giving your brain what it needs to thrive and function optimally. A high carb, low fat diet is much more restrictive than a ketogenic carnivore diet. So it's about what you're putting into your body more so than what you're not putting into your body. Nobody will ever convince me that not eating cookies and cakes and candy is restrictive.
Yes, very good point. And that's one thing I was going to ask you is, what is your response when people say that these diets, like a keto diet or a carnivore diet, that is just another form of a binge eating, or I'm sorry, that is just another form of an eating disorder? Is that basically what your answer would be, or is there more to that for you?
Okay, so I have a story time on this one. After, when was this that I did this? Oh yeah, it was after my big relapse in 2020, which I can promise you had absolutely nothing to do with food. And this is where these kinds of statements just boil my blood, because my eating disorder had absolutely nothing to do with food. And it had very little to do with body image. It had everything to do with the inner turmoil that I wasn't looking at. Food was a drug. And I say food, but it was not food. Junk food, garbage food, packaged, processed, highly palatable, carbs and fats, plus a bunch of other crap, chemicals, flavors, and sweeteners in them, that hijack my brain, hijack all of our brains and make you want more. And that makes it so that you cannot think clearly and logically. It impacts your mental health, it impacts your physical health. Those foods, where am I going with this? Right, 2020. There were emotional wounds I wasn't dealing with. Those foods were drugs that I turned to avoid dealing with my emotions. So I like to say to people that there's no such thing as emotional eating. There's eating to avoid your emotions. And that's what I was doing. Every time I was in a binge, it was because I wanted to zone out numb out, as we say, we hear that a lot, and not deal with the things around me. And then coming to after the binge and realizing what I'd done, this is where I would say maybe the body image played into the purging part of the bulimia. And this is what makes bulimia different than a binge eating disorder. A lot of the time, it's this fear of fat gain that causes a bulimic to go to extra lengths to get rid of the food they consumed for fear of what will happen to their body. So that I can say that the body image plays in there. But in no way, shape, or form was it keto that created this problem. You know, in my story, we can look back and say this problem started at 11 years old. I certainly wasn't restricting carbohydrates back then, nor was I restricting carbohydrates in my mid-20s when I was chronically ill and binged the first time after many years without binging. And if at all any of this played in, the restriction piece was restricting calories, restricting fuel, restricting food quantity. And what does play in very much so into binge eating is your body, when your body needs things that it's not getting, nutrients, calories, fuel for your brain and for your body, it is going to create massive hunger and cravings. And that physiological response to being malnourished is very difficult to overcome. So you better have a steel trap mind if you want to overcome that. The fact is, if you're eating all that garbage, it's impacting your mind. So now you have two strikes against you. You're dealing with the mental attachment, if you want to call it addiction to these foods, and the physiological need for more fuel. So if I did anything wrong, and in 2020, it was a combination of the two things. Being completely isolated, I was single and living alone in the city at the time. I had left my full-time job to coach full-time. I had no salary coming in anymore. I did not get unemployment. I was all alone and wasn't ready to deal with that. I thought, everything's fine. I have my dream job. I thought I was going to fly out to LA and do all these photo shoots and become this fitness model because that was the plan. And then everything shut down. And it rocked my world and I didn't want to look at it. And so I spent 6 months in 2020 not looking at it and instead shoving my face with food. So it was that part on the emotional side, coupled with the fact that I was 3 weeks out to a show when the shutdown happened. So I was already very low on calories. My body fat was low and my body really needed more food. Had I, let's say I wasn't dealing with all of that turmoil emotionally, had I had the wherewithal to say, I just need to eat more real food, healthy fats, I could have come out of that without dealing with the relapse. But these things combined are a very difficult thing to fight against. And I brought all this up because in 2021, when I took a whole year of recovery, I fell into the trap of allowance. You have to allow all foods to really heal from your eating disorder. And for the first 6 months of 2021, I did that. But guess what? It wasn't the rice. It wasn't healthy carbs, as they say, right? It wasn't rice and sweet potatoes and starchy vegetables that I missed. It was cakes and cookies and candy and chocolate and all of the junk. So it was, oh, I should eat all foods because all foods fit. And once I eat all foods for a while, then it'll just go away because that's what they tell you will happen. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I gained 30 pounds. I was now overweight again in body fat percentage. I was the exact opposite of thriving. I struggled with depression that entire time. I worked with a therapist, but it was not lifting. I was going deeper and deeper into the hole until I got with a functional physician who believes in keto, believes in low carb diets. And we started working on healing my gut. And to do so, we had to go on some very heavy therapeutic herbals and probiotics and things of that nature. And he put his foot down and said, listen, no donuts for the next 8 weeks. Like, let's not talk about what's going to happen later. I'm not saying you can never have one again for the rest of your life, but if you want what we're doing to work, all that has to come out. And so at that point, I said, you know what? I'm ready to dive back into keto. And so I took all the junk out, and it was all real food again, and it was ketogenic. And we all know what happens when you put healthy fats in. It's like your brain starts working again. And I'll tell you, it was night and day. And that is the best experience I've ever had to show, to really illustrate these foods are doing nothing for us. There's absolutely no reason why we need to include all foods.
I completely agree. And I want to just kind of circle back a little bit to make sure that I'm clear on a little bit of the story, and so that we know that the viewers are really clear. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like the binge eating and the binging and the purging, that basically wrapped up in college when you had that moment where your friend caught you, you prayed, you kind of leaned on faith, you learned you're valuable, your vessel, all of that. And then you went through that terrible relationship, that toxic relationship, and you had all those health issues, but you weren't binging at that time, correct?
Mm-mm.
Okay. But then you started to get into the fitness a bit, and then having a little disappointments here and there, broke your thumb, and had your first binge, correct? In years.
Yep.
And then started the bodybuilding, which was great and positive in many ways. But afterwards, like you mentioned, being so restrictive, if you're not prepared, you're not well equipped, you started kind of binging a little bit more. And then it sounds like right around the time of COVID in 2020, when all of your plans fell apart, your business is not doing well, your bodybuilding show got canceled, and you were already so thin and almost ready to go. And then that's when you really got in this deep hole with the binging and the depression, right?
100%. You're spot on.
So,
And it was, if you see that theme, is that every time I got really, really lean, once again, I will say bodybuilding to a point is healthy, and then to a point it starts becoming unhealthy. And nobody should ever live at that level. And so whenever my mindset started going, and what happened in 2020 is this concept of, well, I need to stay lean, because shows were getting canceled, but they were getting rescheduled all year long. And so I kept having this thought of, well, I need to stay lean. I need to stay lean. I need to be ready for a show. That thinking is really the wrong thinking. I should have taken that as, let me take an off season to get back up to where I need to be in between shows. And that's what I've done ever since. And now it's about taking the time to have a proper building season to optimize your health again, yet get pretty quickly and safely up to a healthy body fat after a show, and then stay there, and then have a short time where you cut for a show, and then the same thing. You have to have this cycle, and you can't be stuck in this, I need to stay lean.
I hear that. Now, someone who is against low carb diets might say, well, she was already doing a keto diet. Obviously, that's the problem, because she can never stick with this and she starts binging. But what I hear, because I resonate so deeply with it, is that your mindset had to change for the keto diet to actually be not just the keto diet, but the keto diet and all of the cutting and stuff for these shows to be sustainable. And I personally experienced something like that myself. I went carnivore, had a ton of healing from my skin conditions, but I was sort of doing it as an elimination diet. And then I started adding things back, but instead of adding reasonably healthy whole foods, I was adding chocolate chip cookies and cake and stuff. So I started binging again, and I just had to completely quit the carnivore diet altogether. But then 9 months later, I had the same epiphany of like, that's when I felt so good. That's how I want to eat all the time. It's not just a temporary thing that's flash in the pan. And once I changed my mindset, that's been over a year. I have not deviated once. So let's talk a bit about mindset. And then I want to touch on motivation. So I'd love to hear kind of how you feel about that, what you think someone's mindset needs to be on really any diet or exercise program. And then I'm going to ask you a question about some motivation stuff.
Okay, yeah, I think 100%. I like to say that restriction is in the mind. It has nothing to do with what you're eating and not eating. It has everything to do with how you feel about what you're eating and not eating. There have been times that I have been keto and felt very restricted. There have been times where I was carnivore and felt no restriction at all, which you could say carnivore is a more restrictive keto diet, right? It's all about the way you look at it and your perspective. Is this something I'm choosing? Why am I choosing this? And then ensuring you're choosing it for the right reasons, right? Because if I had only looked at keto as a means to an end, which let's say those first couple of shows, when I got into bodybuilding just because I wanted to lose the body fat, which I see a lot of women doing. And then the whole emphasis is just getting the body fat off. Whereas now I see it as a way to support an optimal lifestyle and optimal health. There's a completely different connotation there. It also really helps with the body image. When I was at one of my lowest after a show in 2017, I had been looking at all of these images of women who compete in bikini, and I was in bikini at the time. I've actually since switched categories. So now I'm in wellness and I'm working my way up to the next level of muscularity in the sport. At that time, I realized I was looking at women that I will never look like. Even as small as I've ever gotten, I never looked like that. I don't have slim legs. I don't have this long, slim body. And so I had this ideal in my head that was not realistic for me. And so what I started to do was unfollow all of these women and stop looking at these women that I would never look like. And I looked at my body and I looked at the bodies of competitors that I looked up to that had similar body structures. And I changed what my ideal was. I started looking at these women with more muscle, and they were thicker. They were, bigger legs, bigger waist. And at first, I didn't really like that look. And now I absolutely love it. So when I'm in the gym now, it's not about losing weight. And I think that's another struggle that women have with the fitness side of things. Fitness for them is only about weight loss. Why they're in all these cardio classes and everything's about cardio. Lifting weights changes the game. You start to recognize your body for what it's capable of. Getting stronger becomes a goal. Accomplishing certain movements you never thought you could do, strength, agility, speed, so much more than even just the weights lifted. But it becomes about, I am strong, I am capable, look what my body's capable of doing, rather than just what it looks like. But then at the same time, it was changing the ideal of what I even want my body to look like. And now I love the building phase. So here I am eating more food than I've ever eaten before, easily maintaining a body fat percentage that is healthy, lean, but normal, not too low, not too high, not having these major swings in between every season, and loving it, loving putting the food in my body that supports my body, not being afraid of the calories, not being afraid of the higher fat, and even my carbs are up a little bit, in the 30 to 50 range, which as an athlete still keeps me ketogenic. So I'm able to play with adding things in and healthy things, not going about it the way I used to with all of the sweets. But I'm no longer hung up about the foods. And this is, I went on a tangent to come back and say, my mindset around food has changed, because before, when I thought about keto, it was all about the numbers, right? How I could massage the numbers and fit things in. And whenever I started playing around with that, and it's like, oh, well, if I can fit this in and it's a protein bar, which are really just junk candy bars, or anything else that's not real food. And then you have to trade off nutrient dense whole foods for these junk foods if you want to fit it in your macros. So there were times where I fell into that if it fits your macros camp, and that's where malnutrition comes in. So even on a ketogenic diet, you can either be in a very well formulated, nutrient dense ketogenic protocol that's serving your physiological and mental needs, or you can be doing it in a way that is detracting from your health. And that makes all the difference. Once I stopped looking at the numbers so much and focusing so much on the numbers, a strawberry didn't scare me, right? It wasn't like, oh my God, a strawberry is gonna throw me out of ketosis and ruin everything, versus, oh, this Quest bar has better macros than this fruit. Okay, one of them is real whole food and the other is a manufactured piece of junk that's doing nothing for my body. So when I started thinking about it like that, a whole world of variety opened up of what I can have. And it didn't feel like this can and can't. I can and can't have this and that. The biggest thing I would say for anyone struggling with the restriction piece, check your mindset and ask yourself, what are these statements you're saying about the things you're eating and not eating? I can and can't, or I choose, or I will and I won't, or I do and I don't, is so much more powerful than I can't have, I'm not allowed. It's a victim mentality, it's poor me, and it also, this is another kind of subject, but it also teaches the people around you about how you feel about your diet. I think the reason why so many people are negative about a ketogenic protocol is because they're looking at the people doing it who are complaining all the time about what they can't eat. And so if you want the people around you to embrace and support what you're doing, speak about it positively. If you want to feel better about what you're doing, speak internally positively about it. I am choosing these things because these things are doing XYZ for me. I'm choosing not to eat these things because XYZ. It changes.
Those are all, sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
Please do, because I could just go on and we'll be here all day.
No, I wanted to say those are all such great points. And even for somebody who is more strict, like on a ketogenic, or I'm sorry, on a carnivore diet, these same things apply. I mean, choosing the real food. So for example, having a steak instead of a bag of pork rinds, I mean, you're not going to feel as good. And also the choosing, oh my gosh, that is so powerful to me too. Like if you know that if you eat pepper on your steak, I mean, many people are going to think it's crazy, you can't tolerate pepper, but this is real, people can't tolerate it. And you keep telling yourself, well, I can't, I wish I could, I hear that in my DMs all the time. And it's like, no, you can absolutely put pepper on your steak and eat it all you want, but you're choosing to not have rheumatoid arthritis or whatever the thing is. And we're so lucky to have this body that tells us what is hurting us. Not everyone has that luxury, and they don't know until it's too late. But I have it. I know on my skin immediately when I've eaten something I shouldn't have. And I think that's such a gift, and I'm so grateful for that. And that's made it so much easier for me to stick to this kind of a diet.
I like to say that whenever I notice that something seems to have a hold on me, it doesn't even matter what it is, I probably need to remove it from the equation for a little while. And I did that this past January, February. My boyfriend and I both went on the Lion diet. And we are big coffee fiends. We are carnivores. I'm more ketovore, but we are carnivores plus coffee. And we went off coffee for 21 days and went off everything but beef, salt, and water for 21 days. And I'll tell you, after that, and this is why I say I've been keto and felt very restricted, and I've been carnivore and felt no restriction. Coming out of the Lion diet and just putting lamb and salmon and tuna and chicken and pork and bacon all back in my diet, I felt like, oh my goodness, carnivore is like an amusement park. I have so many things I can choose from. Whereas just the year prior, when I first started going carnivore, it felt more restrictive because it was all about what I'm taking out. So if we focus our attention on what we quote unquote can't have or what we're not having, then of course we're going to feel restricted. But when we think about all the things we can have, and I love variety. My boyfriend, he can eat ground beef all day long, and that's it. All meals just ground beef, or all meals butter and eggs all day long, every day for a week, he'd be happy. I love my beef once a day, but I don't want it all day long. So we have very different ways that we do it, but I love the variety. So I have seafood, I have all different kinds of animal kingdom products all week long. And it gives me that variety that I crave. I think it also gives me a nutrient variety that I actually see probably a lot of carnivores that may be a way that they could get more optimization out of what they're doing, because each type of animal product has different nutrient values. You know, fish and seafood is going to have different values than beef, than lamb, than chicken, than pork. And there are certain nutrients we get in higher quantities in different types. So, you know, that's just one of the ways that I get to feel like I have all the options in the world.
Yes, I love that. You can have the keto or carnivore rainbow. I heard someone say that recently and I loved
love
it.
that. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to circle back specifically on motivation. Besides mindset, that's another thing that I just love diving into. And of course, it takes tons of motivation to get prepped for these shows and get back on track after and all that. And I once heard you say something, I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to read it. Well, let me actually backtrack. So people often say, I can't do that. I'm just not motivated, especially when it comes to nutrition and fitness goals. And I've been saying for a long time that nobody is motivated every day. You can't rely on motivation to achieve big changes in your life. And I've heard you say motivation is like brushing your teeth. It's something you've got to do every day. And I'm so intrigued by that analogy. And I just would love for you to explain kind of what you meant by that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you're not going to be motivated all the time, and you can't rely on motivation to get you there. It's like saying, I'm going to wait to go to the gym until I feel like it. Well, good luck. You're probably not going to feel like it. Even to this day, I don't feel like going to the gym all the time. It is just what I do. So part of it is there's two pieces here, and the everyday piece is more. There's an exercise I ask all my clients to do when they first start with me. And I totally stole it from Glenn Livingston. If you've heard of Dr. Glenn Livingston, he wrote the book Never Binge Again. This was a huge, one of many resources along my journey that has been a game changer for me, because it makes things very black and white. And one of the things, I actually went through his intensive and his intensive coaching program. And one of the things that he teaches in there is this, what he calls the big why and the big why not exercises. And I've now instituted these with my clients. I ask them to go through each one, and what they each are the big why is looking ahead a year from now. And then you categorize all these different areas of your life, and it walks you through these questions about your career and your family and your health and your confidence and your relationships. And so you go through everything and you write down, okay, in a year from now, where do I want to be in relation to all these things? And you're putting it in context of, if I do the things that I'm setting out to do, then I will be here in a year. And then you want to get really crystal clear on what that looks like, and most importantly, how that feels. What will it feel like for me to be that person a year from now? The Natalie that I want to be in a year from now. When I achieve that, how will all of these different areas of my life be impacted? So that's your kind of vision statement. And I encourage clients to print it out, put it somewhere you can see it every day, read it every day. And what I did when I was leaving my career and building this coaching career was, I had something like that about when I'm a coach. And I read it out loud. I recorded an audio, and every morning while I was brushing my teeth, I listened to it. And that's another big piece with the brushing your teeth thing, is an anchor. If you can have an anchor when you're trying to do anything new, it's going to be difficult. So even the listening to your vision statement, if you don't do something to make you do that, then you won't do that either. So anytime you can connect a new habit with an existing habit that is already ingrained, then it becomes an anchor. So you can listen to these vision statements in the morning, every morning while you're brushing your teeth, in your own voice of hearing yourself in the energy of where you will be when you get there. And it is the biggest motivator than I have ever experienced before. So that is super powerful. But I'll tell you what's even more powerful. The big why not, this is the pain that you don't want to feel. This is you in a year from now, if you don't do the things you need to do, if you don't follow the plan you've laid out for yourself, if you continue to stay in the binge cycle, if you continue to cheat, if you continue to go off plan, if you continue to not go to the gym, whatever it might be that you said you're going to do and you're struggling to do, you need to get crystal clear on how painful it will be for you in a year from now if you don't do those things. And this is a greater motivator than the vision. Because, like I said, when I was chronically ill, there was no question about following my real food plan because I knew the pain. I was viscerally connected to the pain. And so what I see with most people is this wanting to avoid the pain. And that's what the binges were for me, right? Avoiding the emotional pain, whether it's physical or emotional or both. The only way out is through. So if you stare at that, if you stare at both, if you're able to see, and I call this like this, you look at this kind of V of the two trajectories, you're either going to be here or you're going to be here in a year from now. Now those decisions, those little daily decisions that seem so small, because I hear this with clients all the time, oh, it's just X number of calories, or it's just X extra carbs. It doesn't seem like a very big decision. Small choices. But which direction are those small choices leading you in? When you can see the end point of those two directions, I either want to be here or I want to be here. Which one is it going to be? Every single daily decision holds a lot more weight. And now those pork rinds instead of that steak are a much more detrimental decision.
Yes, that was so good. I'm definitely getting that book and also stealing that, at least the part about the listening to your sort of affirmation while you're brushing your teeth. That's brilliant. Starting tomorrow.
Yes, I love it.
I have to brush my teeth tonight. I'll start tonight.
There you go. Better.
I know that you and Coach Bronson, your boyfriend, are hosting a conference this summer. Antithetic, is that right?
That's right. You said it right. Well done. Yes. So July 14th and 15th here in Columbia, Maryland, which is just between Baltimore and DC. So lots to see in the area if you want to make it an extended trip. But this is the first of its kind on the East Coast. We see a lot going on the West Coast and other parts, a lot going on in Texas. But we saw a big gap in our area that, nobody's doing this in-person stuff here. So we know how powerful and important it is to have a community that is not just online, because we all have to rely on this online community because most of us don't have people in our everyday lives that are doing the same thing we're doing. So we are the antithetic. What this means is going against the grain, swimming upstream. And I think something that everyone who has really been successful with this carnivore keto lifestyle have had to lean into being different and embrace being different and celebrate being different instead of trying to follow the crowd and fit in with what the traditional mainstream is doing. So that's what our movement is about. It's more than a conference, it's a movement. We're really excited. We've got Maria Emmerich kicking us off on Friday nights. We've got Dr. Sivas, we've got Dr. Barry, we've got some really powerful heavy hitters in the space that will be speaking. It is an intimate environment. We're expecting 150 to 200 people, so it will truly be like a family, the antithetic family, the antithetic army. So we invite you to join us in this movement, celebrate and embrace yourself for being different and be a leader in this space and not just a follower.
That's so awesome. Thank you. And that sounds really cool and intimate with all those people that you wouldn't necessarily get to speak to normally, but there, I bet you will.
Yes, exactly. We see it as a different thing than like a really large conference. It's not just speaking from this large stage, but we'll have book signings at the end on Saturday. We've got a catered lunch on Saturday, so we will feed you, and you'll have an opportunity to actually really connect with the speakers as well.
Great. Now, if people want to work with you unrelated to that, but they just want to work with you after what they've heard today, how can they find you and how can they work with you?
Sure thing. Yeah. So on YouTube, it's Keto Bikini Secrets. And on Facebook, my group is the best place to start, Keto Bikini Secrets on Facebook. Inside there, I teach live free masterclasses every Monday night. So you can get a lot of content there and a lot of support and encouragement from the ladies in the group. And then the next step up from that, I just launched a couple of days ago my new membership, the Grace and Grind membership. Grace and grind, because we have to learn how to find grace within this health and fitness grind. It's not just grind all the time. So that will be the first level to get a taste of working with me and connecting with the community on some live weekly office hours and a group private text. And then my full coaching, you can reach out in any of those places or DM me on Instagram at the Keto Bikini Pro. And we can book a call, see if you're a fit for private coaching and all the bells and whistles that happen there if you're ready to really dive in.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was really, really a pleasure having you.
I'm so grateful to you for the opportunity. I absolutely love talking about this stuff, especially the mindset and body image and healing our relationship with food and ourselves. So thank you for the platform.
I hope you've enjoyed this. If so, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments who you might like me to interview in the future.